Welcome to the panel reacting to the experience of war. This panel is about the impact of the war on Ukrainian society. I believe the topics of the panel would appeal to many Canadians. First, because many of them used to look at history through the lenses of their personal or family perspective. And second, because Canada is multicultural, multi-religious country, and it's a good example for Ukraine. Let me also say a couple of words from my family perspective. I have no personal experience of war, but when I was a child, my father, a decorated veteran of the Second World War, told me about his own experience on several occasions, very reluctantly. Every time I was extremely disappointed. There was nothing heroic in his stories. They were so different from what we learned in school that I couldn't even use them in my essay. It was all about how to get some extra food, how to find a shelter, how to shoot with closed eyes, in one word, how to survive. When he was wounded and evacuated far from the front line, it was the happiest moment in his life. And by the way, it happened in 1943 near Zaporizhzhia, where the front line is today. He never told me about his religious experience. This topic was strictly forbidden, but I assume that all of them prayed a lot just to survive. Celebrating Christmas is also personal. In the Soviet Union, Christmas was replaced with the New Year, which was the most popular holiday with its own rituals and symbols. However, it was purely a secular event. Kolyadki and Щедрівки, Christmas carols, were not forbidden in the region where I lived, but they were completely deprived of their religious contents. And now I'm saying as historian, history suggests that switching to a new calendar is difficult and sometimes very risky endeavor for any society. Any historian of Ukraine would be tempted to find parallels with 1918, or we can go even deeper to the end of the 16th century, when attempts to impose the Gregorian calendar upon Ukrainian Orthodox community provoked a huge and fateful standoff between Ukrainians. That's where I should stop. Invite our first presenter, Oleg Kyselov. Please take the floor.
Thank you, Volodymyr, for this introduction to the topic. I was also thinking about should I make some historical implications, but then I decided not to do that. I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be in Canada, to be in the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. Gratitude to organizers for this such good conference. And I'm very glad that we have already heard some presentations of Dmitrovov, Kolena, Bogdan, and Rifert that is somehow connected to my topic. I will not emphasize about church competitions or decolonization of Ukrainian spiritual space or spiritual independence, but still I see how this topic could be also discussed from these perspectives. My journey to the topic started in December 2022. Like other Ukrainians, I took part in questionnaire in Ukrainian phone application Diya. The questionnaire was about which day do you celebrate Christmas. And there were introduction from the Ministry of Culture and Informational Policy, Alexander Tkachenko. He made a brief introduction to the topic, also with some historical background. When I heard his introduction, I felt as if he wanted me to choose December 25. So, and I wrote in Facebook that it is a kind of manipulation, right? And then I get some feedbacks, and after that I started to collect different discussions about Christmas. At least I found two statements in his speech when he wanted me to vote for December. And I say vote because a lot of people, speaking truly, which I get known from Facebook, they perceive this questionnaire not as questionnaire, but as voting. Let's vote for December 25 and show other world, or I don't know whom, that we support switching, celebrating Christmas. His two statements: most people in the world celebrate Christmas on December 25. For Ukraine, the observance of Julian calendar is still a kind of legacy of Russian Empire. Of course, that most people in the world do not celebrate Christmas on December 25 because there are just 31% Christians in the world. Probably 69 people do not celebrate at all. In my paper, I also discuss that he mentioned 15 churches, not 16 or 17. It's also kind of discussion. But still, who is counting, right? How can we present the same numbers? Right? What does it mean that 6 churches of 15 celebrate on January 7? We can do the same thing. We can count the number of believers, for example, right? That these of 9 churches or 11 churches who celebrate on December 25. And I have done this calculation grounding on Wikipedia because Wikipedia provides like number of believers of each church. I take 16 churches. I didn't count Orthodox Church of Ukraine because we don't know the amount of their believers, but I include Orthodox Church of America and Macedonian Orthodox Church. And I found that just a little bit more than 16% of Orthodox believers celebrate Christmas on December 25. A little bit less than 84% of Orthodox believers celebrate on January 7. It is obvious why Minister of Culture, or I don't know, probably someone else who wrote his speech, opt to talk about just churches, not about believers. He wants to perceive us that most of Orthodox churches, most of Orthodox believers celebrate on December 5. The phrase legacy of Russian Empire also sounds very extremely negative in Ukraine, and we know why. So I will not stop here, but it is also a kind of manipulation here. But this questionnaire was not the first step to switching on the celebrating Christmas. The first step was in 2017. I use here word bill as yesterday Dmitro used draft law, законопроект. So законопроект I translate as bill. So in 2017, Ukrainian parliament adopted a new law which was granted on Bill 5496. 25 members of parliament proposed to include December 25 as another official holiday to celebrate Christmas. So the first one in this list of 25 deputies was Pavlo Unguran. By the way, the deputy was from different political parties and blocs. Most of them, of course, so there was no like these pro-Russian parties, right? But like centric and right-centric parties. But Pavlo Urgunyan is well known because he's Baptist activist and member of Baptist Church. Every bill have explanatory note, right? So I watched in the note what they have there. Notes states that according to official statistics, the Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, and other Christian communities, a total of 23,000, celebrate Christmas on January 7, while other Catholics and Protestant communities, approximately 11,000, which is 30% of Christian communities, celebrate Christmas on December 25. Thus, a significant number of believers in Ukraine celebrate this religious holiday not on a day defined at the legislative level as a day off. In addition, in general, most Christian churches in the world celebrate Christmas on December 25. For many Ukrainians, such a date is also acceptable because of the optimization of celebration of religious holiday of Christmas, which accompanied by fasting, and the second one, the New Year. Who's counting part 2, right? So in Ukraine, when we talk about religion, we can use 2 different sources. The first one is official statistics. Official statistics that provide agency of religious affairs, what is death right now, but we know that during all these 30 years, it had different names. So according to statistics, we have 9,820 Protestant communities and 933 Roman Catholic congregations. This is data for 2016, when the bill was provided in the Ukrainian parliament. It is true that approximately it is like 11,000 of communities. But not all of them celebrated Christmas on December 25. So I make a little story about that. I went to their websites, the websites of churches that are members of All Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations, and found that, speaking truly, only one of them, All Ukrainian Union of Evangelical Christian Baptist Churches, celebrated Christmas on December 25. I'm not sure that they celebrate it, but at least they greet their believers, Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. That means that Christmas is before New Year. Other websites of other religious communities, they greet their believers with New Year, Happy New Year, and Merry Christmas. So, of course, this is just one evidence, I would say. So in different websites, I found different information, but speaking truly, this is the only one church. So we are talking not about 11,000 communities, right, but 900 communities of Roman Catholics and 2,500 of Baptist church communities. Another source which we operate in Ukraine is the data of sociological services. The questions and the data is not about the quantity of believers, but it is about self-identification. I compare that with how people support football clubs and political parties. Everyone knows which political parties or football club he or she prefers. But in some circumstances, he can or she can switch for supporting another club because probably this particular club do not take part in this championship. Or if we know that political party will not get enough votes to come to parliament, then we can vote for another one. So speaking truly, when we have these sociological services in Ukraine, this is also about not just identification. This is also kind of voting, right? So we support this church and we support this church. We can track how people support Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate during the last 10 years, and we'll see how it depends on political circumstances, not just religious. So, but according to sociological surveys, we have less than 1% of Protestants and 1% of Roman Catholics, right? This is not 30% of religious communities, right? So every bill also have expert report from special unit in Ukrainian parliament. And this unit in their report, they wrote that, speaking truly, there is no necessity to make this amendment. So the bill was amendment to Article 73 of Labor Code of Ukraine, because this article, speaking truly, provides option for non-Orthodox communities to celebrate Christmas on December 25. This amendment was not against discrimination, speaking truly, right? This is just they want to include one more holiday in the list of official holidays. For the parliament to vote for and adopt the law, this is one of the comments that we get from Andrei Parubiy, who was the head of parliament at that time. Parubiy said, "The essence of the initiative lies in the fact that the majority of the civilized world," very interesting phrase, "and among them, the majority of the local Orthodox churches celebrate Christmas on December 25. Respecting the feeling of believers of both the Eastern and Western rites, we propose that both January 7 and December 25 be holidays." There was another interesting thing that Ukrinform, for example, mentioned the new date of the celebration as the Catholic Christmas. And of course, Protestant websites presented that as a promotion of the Protestant and Catholic Christmas. Then I found a very interesting event. And December 24, 2017, we have a Christmas concert on Sofievska Square in the Kyiv. So Sofievska Square, one of the main squares in Kyiv. There was a lot of different statements from which we heard from the stage. So one of the first was from the host of the concert, Dmitro Khorkin. He said, "With Europe, with America and many countries today, we celebrate Christmas. For the first time and confidently, we have taken a step into European space and are opening the door for good changes. And furthermore, he emphasized that the same year Ukraine obtained a visa-free regime with European Union and signed a EU association agreement. Speaking truly, not a science, but this agreement entered into force in 2017. The celebration of Christmas on December 25 were presented as one of the steps toward European integration. The European Atlantic direction of Ukraine is speak in the words of current edition of Constitution of Ukraine. There were other statements there. Probably I will not stop all them. So we have from Turchinov, and it is important that Turchinov was presented as initiator of debates about dating of celebrating Christmas, and he is also a member of Baptist Church. And we have several years ago we have good presentation about blood plaster, right, from Mikhail Cherdenkov. We have also greetings from Petro Poroshenko, who said that he chose to celebrate Christmas twice, on January 7 and December 25. Then we have this some facts about church decisions. So the first decision was in October 2022, when Orthodox Church of Ukraine decided to allow to perform Christmas Mass on December 25. So it wasn't decision to switch on new calendar, right? But it was, they allowed to some communities that wants to celebrate on December 25 to do that. This is the same time when we have questionnaire on DIA, right? And this is the most probably active period when Ukrainians discuss celebrating of Christmas. A couple of months after that, the Synod of Bishops of Ukrainian Greece Catholic Church, they decided to change the calendar. By the way, they didn't tell us that they changed into Gregorian or New Julian calendar. They just mentioned new calendar. Probably it is still Gregorian, but I'm not sure. They didn't mention the war there. However, they mentioned circumstances of the place and time. And in Archbishop's pastoral message after this, which was also dedicated to celebration Christmas, he wrote about historical and social realities. Probably they mean war, right? The war, but they would like not to tell us directly. After that, the Council of Bishops of Orthodox Church of Ukraine, they make a decision to switch to the new calendar. The resolution refers to the aggressive Russian war against Ukraine. They also wrote that nowadays it is perceived by the majority not so much as connected with old Ukrainian traditions, but as connected with the Russian church culture. After all, the Orthodox churches which support the Orthodox Church of Ukraine use the modern calendar, while its opponents, primarily the Russian Orthodox Church, follow the old calendar. In my paper, I emphasize only these political arguments, right? So there are other arguments in their decisions and in discussions. This is a program of Andriy Bulgarov, and it is interesting how he presents his understanding. I have watched different programs. One of them was with Kirill Gavarun, and it is interesting how the host of shows present this, how they discuss this issue, right? They don't care about theological or astronomical issues, but they're interesting only in political one. Andriy Bulgarov, in the end of his show, he said, "Now we will look closely at which calendar a person celebrates Christmas. And if someone celebrates according to the old Moscow calendar, then we will understand that such a person is not for Ukraine." It is about new law, right? We have new law adopted in 2023. The new law was presented by President Zelensky, and they accept the law and sign the law during 1 month, very quickly. What was new in the law? They said about only one Christmas on December 25. They exclude from the official lists of official holidays, January 7. They refer to the war in the explanatory note. The authors, of course, not Zelensky is the author, right? They refers to decision of Synod of Orthodox Church of Ukraine, but not Ukrainian Greek Orthodox Church. The bill's purpose is to abandon the Russian legacy of imposing the celebration of Christmas on January 7 and setting the date of the celebration of Christmas on December 25. What is interesting in this law, I have already mentioned Article 73 of Labor Codex of Ukraine, and the article said that other non-Orthodox communities, religious communities, can celebrate, can take a day off of their own holidays. But according to the logic of the nowadays legacy, or how it goes, law, Orthodox communities, and it is not just Ukrainian Orthodox Church, but it is also Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Kiev, Patriarchate. We still have some communities, and it is some communities in Orthodox Church of Ukraine, because it is allowed to some of these communities to celebrate Christmas on January 7. So they became a discriminated communities because they can't take a day off on January 7, because this statement is only about non-Orthodox communities. In different discussions, people refer to different arguments. Arguments of authority, arguments of authenticity, historical arguments. They try to use different calendars and newspapers from West Ukraine, from East Ukraine, Ukrainian diaspora, and show that, Ukrainians celebrate Christmas on December 25, or Ukrainians used to celebrate Christmas on January 7. This is why we should celebrate. It depends on what arguments do we have, right? Thank you all for your attention. Thank you very much.
Dr. Lidiya Lozova, our next presenter, please take the floor.
Hello, everyone. It is an honor and pleasure for me to be here with you today and to present some of the results of my research. The object of this research falls into three categories. First category is experimental icons created by Ukrainian iconographers from 2014 until present with visual references to the Russian war against Ukraine. Then there are images, let's say, in dialogue with icon painting tradition, which can be categorized as modern sacred art, with visual references to war as well. In Ukraine, unlike in Russia, such works, sacred art works, are often called icons and not just sacred art. In Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv, and some other cities, the artists who create those icons and artworks, sacred artworks, are individual Orthodox artists, both of the UOC, OCU, and some even identify with EP, Constantinople, sometimes united in a workshop. In Lviv, however, they form a community. They are both Greek Catholic and Orthodox OCU artists, who are often graduates, students, and professors of the Department of Sacred Art of the Lviv Academy of Art. And their work is often exhibited at a unique space called Icon Art Gallery of Contemporary Sacred Art. And the third category of images that I explore are artworks and visual artifacts, such as posters and internet memes, anonymous memes, which are rather conceived as social and political statements than art, or they can also be conceived as art, that use iconographic motifs. Because all three categories may include traditional iconographic motifs, people whom I show them often get confused and ask me whether they are really icons or not. A short answer to this question is some of them rather are and some of them rather aren't. But in reality, what has been called icons in history of Eastern Christianity has not been unproblematic. On the one hand, the icon is the essential visual expression of the dogmas of Orthodox or Eastern Christian faith, whose purpose is to facilitate prayer. It is for this reason that icon painting is a rather conservative practice, suspicious of changes and innovations. On the other hand, the point of icon painting is not to represent a metaphysical reality of God, but to witness the reality of unity, of union of man and God. In the classical definition of Uspensky, the icon does not represent divinity, rather it indicates the human participation in the divine life. And the human element of this union necessarily encompasses the human context, the reality of history, a particular place, time, social and even political circumstances of the life of Christ, Mary and the apostles, as well as the Christian saints and church events of later epochs until nowadays. It is true that references to this world and things contemporary became more obvious and frequent in iconography after the fall of the Byzantine Empire, especially in the 17th, 19th century. For example, in this Ukrainian icon of crucifixion with portrait of Leontiy Svichka of the 17th century, while Christ, St. John and Mary are depicted in the heavenly realm by a golden background, the historic Cossack kernel is situated in a natural landscape with a historic local monastery in the background. But even Byzantine icons were never purely spiritual, acontextual, or apolitical either. To a great extent, they were emblematic of and tightly connected to their society. In icons, art, theology, and social and political life would often overlap. Moreover, even though today the Orthodox icon is associated with peaceful, prayerful contemplation, in history icons have never been completely disconnected from warfare. From the beginning of Byzantine Empire, at least from the 6th, 7th century, we have evidence that icons were often brought to the battlefield not only for divine protection, but also conquest. The icon of the face of Christ, for example, was frequently used on military banners. And this is not about Alexander Nevsky. I just cannot present you an image from the 13th century with the battlefield. In modern-day Russia, the face of Christ is the main icon of the Armed Forces Cathedral in Moscow, which celebrates not only the resurrection of Christ, but also, as you know, probably the Russian victory in the Great Patriotic War. And on the back of this icon, a rifle from the Second World War is mounted into the board. Today, the message behind this weaponized icon is clear: God is with us, and we will win again. And the icons of the Mother of God were also traditionally present in the battlefield. A good example is this 15th century narrative icon of the miracle of the icon of the God, Mother, and Child of the Sign, which tells the story of the battle between Suzdal and Novgorod parties in the 12th century. The sign icon, a small image in the center of the top row, was placed on the city wall of Novgorod. When it was struck by a Suzdalian arrow, it wept, and after that, the Novgorodians were able to defeat the Suzdalians, who started attacking each other in the lower row. Another example is a more recent Russian icon of Avgustov, Mother of God, or the icon of victory, which includes historic details of the First World War, precisely the apparition of Mary in 1914 to Russian soldiers before the Battle of Avgustov, after which the Russians win. This is now Poland. The right hand of Mary here points to the west. And in the lower part, there is a Russian military camp. The Avgustov icon was used as a prototype for the iconography of the Mother of God in the mosaic in the central apse of the Russian Armed Forces Cathedral. Here, a rather violent Mary replicates not only the gesture of the Avgustov icon, but also that of a woman from the Soviet poster, "The Order of Stalin is the Order of the Motherland." In short, icons, or what has been called icons in Eastern Christianity, have lived, served, and changed together with their societies and not apart from them, including in wartime. Meanwhile, in my opinion, the character of the developments in iconography has often been defined by the social ethos of the images, which could range from compassionate to aggressive. In order to discuss the social ethos of icons and icon-like images during wartime in Ukraine, in my research I used two documents on social ethos of the Orthodox Church that were issued in the 21st century. For the Life of the World, towards the social ethos of the Orthodox Church, which was issued by the Ecumenical Patriarchate in 2020 and abbreviated as FLOW, and the basis of the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church of 2000, I abbreviated as social concept. While FLOW structures the social ethos around the human person who can and should bless, elevate, and transfigure this world in communal ascetic struggle with the Eucharist in the center, the social concept document shows lack of trust in human ability to transfigure the world because of human sinfulness. The Church's main relationship in the social concept is with the state, and the mission of the Church is a top-bottom promotion of Christian values in the society with the help of the state. The societal ideal in the social concept clearly lies in the pre-secular past, and the society's growth towards God's kingdom essentially entails moving backwards. Freedom, human rights, freedom of conscience are viewed as rather ambivalent and dangerous. In flow, on the contrary, the main relationship of the church is not with the state but with society, and essentially the main relationship is between Christians and cosmos. The text emphasizes the separation of church and state, human rights and freedom of conscience. Overall, flow shows not a top-bottom, but, and this is important for my research, contextual, participatory and compassionate attitude towards the world and especially the vulnerable in the world. As for the ethics of war and peace, the social concept ethics is developed around the concept of fatherland, which is understood as that of a sacred nation. War is considered to be evil, but military violence is presented as the way of defense of the fatherland. Nothing is mentioned of the need of repentance and healing of war traumas for those who take part in hostilities. In flow, there is no mentioning of fatherland. The text heavily criticizes nationalism. Violence is understood as not only war violence, but also other kinds of violence, and is called a sin par excellence. The text, however, admits the right for self-defense and the need to protect the vulnerable, sometimes also by force, because the world is wounded by sin. But at the same time, it also recognizes the need for healing of war traumas. In comparison with flow, the social concept doctrine sounds rather militaristic. And my hypothesis is that while a lot of Russian iconography presently is produced in the spirit of the social concept, as in the Armed Forces Cathedral, but not only there. Experimental icons and images with iconographic references to the war in Ukraine more often correspond to the ethos of flow, even though the iconographers in Ukraine may not even know of the existence of those documents. On the other hand, I must also say that the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church is the official social teaching of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. It's just translated into Ukrainian, while the flow is not a document of any of the Ukrainian Orthodox churches, but there was a reception of it in the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Now I will provide some Ukrainian examples. First, the participatory and compassionate character of social ethos in icons and icon-like images in Ukraine may show through the materials used. An example of that is the project Icons and Ammunition Boxes by Kiev-based Orthodox iconographers Alexander Klimenko and Sofia Atlantova. The project began in 2014 when Klimenko visited the war zone in Donbass and noticed the resemblance between boards from ammo boxes and traditional icon boards. And since then, they painted and exhibited traditional icons on untreated ammunition crates in about 150 locations worldwide. Here, the main idea is not to promote war, but to show the immediacy of God's presence amidst the suffering of war, witnessing the promise of ultimate transformation of death into life. And money raised from sales of these icons has been donated to military hospitals and other needs. Another project using the idea of icons on ammunition crates is Icon Saves Lives Ukraine, launched by Icon Art Gallery in Lviv, Art Fila Gallery in New York, together with Ukraine House Washington. It united 20 artists, both Orthodox and Greek Catholic, mainly from Western Ukraine, and the idea was to reflect on the artists' experience of war and to represent the faith, hope, and strength of the Ukrainian nation amidst it. And the project also fundraised for humanitarian needs of Ukraine. Arma Christi project referred to metaphorical iconography, which shows that Christ's real weapon was the instrument of his passion. The artists, Greek Catholic and Orthodox, mainly from Lviv, the ideas and themes of these icons were various, but the works were united by a fragment of a Russian missile mounted into the composition, identifying the suffering of Ukrainians with passion of Christ and expressing faith and hope that it will be overcome. Again, the project fundraised for the humanitarian needs. The social ethos of icons during wartime may also be manifested through iconography itself and not only through the materials on which icons are painted. So at the beginning of the Russian invasion, the workshop Heaven on Earth created the icon The Scourging of Christ. Rooted in the Ukrainian passion icons, it depicts Putin and Kirill as torturers of Christ. And later, the workshop also painted the lament of Jesus Christ over Ukraine, where the face of Christ, in Western iconography of Veronica's veil, which is with the crown of thorns, appears over the scenes of Russian crimes in Ukrainian towns. Recently, I saw an icon of a graduate of the Poltava Missionary Seminary of the USC, I don't know the name of the artist, whose iconography is an interpretation of a modern icon by a famous, one of the world-famous Greek iconographer, George Cordis. While Cordis's icon is about salvation in Christ from loneliness and hypocrisy of contemporary megapolis and contemporary secularized civilization, let's say, the Ukrainian version is clearly about the salvation in Christ amidst the agony of war. Then icons of the Mother of God, the icon Intercede for the Souls of the Desperate by iconographer and Orthodox priest Andriy Ponomarenko from Dnipro, now OCU, shows Mother of God whose position and gesture repeats Mary Orens, the 11th century mosaic of the St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. In the lower register, under Mary's protection, it shows suffering people and even pets in the bomb shelter, destroyed churches and homes, the names of the affected cities, strips of tape on taped windows. Finally, the image of the Mariupol Mother of God by one of the most significant Lviv Greek Catholic iconographers, Ivanka Kripyakevich-Demid, is an emotionally charged interpretation of Our Lady of Vyshgorod, or Lady of Tenderness icon. Its black background and red contours, especially red tears, express grief, although the gold of the halo speaks of the divine presence in the midst of the tragedy. Instead of the traditional Miter Theu inscription, Mother of God, at the right and left top corners, the text in this image says Mista nema, a more zostalos, which is the city is gone, but the sea of Azov, remains. Amore sounding as love remains. It would take many pages to name all images recently created in Ukraine whose iconography relates to war. Their eleos, the mercy or charity that they convey, does not only come from the depicted prototypes of Christ, Mary, the saints, but becomes actualized in people's solidarity around the causes for which such images often fundraise. In the present situation, the social ethos of most, although not all of them, just like in Flow, is about God's solidarity with the suffering Ukrainians who continue to resist and hope for the defeat of the aggressor. However, there are also controversial issues in terms of the social ethos of some images that appear now in Ukraine. The ethos of Flow, for the life of the world, mainly promotes nonviolence and mentions the option of defense and self-defense rather reluctantly, as a tragic necessity, emphasizing the importance of dialogue and peace building. Meanwhile, in the present-day Ukrainian discourse, the emphasis on the positive value of defensive violence as a fight for freedom and the Ukrainian identity is much, much stronger. Therefore, many modern icons and icon-like images include the military. One example is the protection of the Mother of God, the patroness of Ukrainian warriors, which in the OCU was coined as the main Ukrainian military holy image. The figures under Mary's veil, interestingly, include political actors and different kinds of militaries active on the territory of present-day Ukraine through the ages from Kiev Rus to nowadays, excluding Russia-oriented ones. There are no modern rulers here, for example, presidents of modern Ukraine or ecclesial chairmen included in the icon, unlike in traditional prototypes of the protection of the Mother of God, so it's more democratic. Among the characters of the 20th and 21st centuries, there are regular fighters, including a woman. A more controversial image, of which you probably heard in terms of its militarism, is Saint Javelina, which appeared in May 2022 as a mural on a tall apartment building in Kiev, near my place. It represents a stylized Mary who, instead of Christ Emmanuel, is holding a javelin anti-tank system in her hands. Her dark green clothing is akin to that of military uniform. Initially, the mural depicted her with a red halo, but due to the protest of the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches, it was later changed to blue and yellow to represent Ukraine instead of Theotokos. Another controversial issue in terms of the social ethos is the expression of national identity in icons. As I mentioned at the beginning, Flow clearly condemns nationalism, although it allows for patriotism, I quote, as a benign and wholesome feeling so long as it is not mistaken for a virtue in itself or for a moral good even when one's country has become profoundly unjust or destructive. Meanwhile, many modern icons and sacred artworks in Ukraine appear in blue and red colors of the Ukrainian flag. What is that? Especially in the West, when I show such images, they are often perceived in the same way as the Russian iconographies, which include, for example, the colors of the Russian flag and cause aversion, something like this. I agree with the fact that this may be dangerous. I mean, Ukrainian images in national colors, let's say, religious images in national colors. In each case, context has to be taken into account and treated with attention today. A telling witness of the importance of the context is the story of the face of Christ icon on blue and yellow background by a young Greek Catholic iconographer, and astrophysicist, by the way, Olga Khmelevska. It was painted after a tremendous turmoil. When the Russian invasion began on February 24, Olga could not paint anything for weeks. And this image was born later from much pain, as a prayer to God to protect Ukrainian people. Is it then the same as the face of Christ on the background of the Russian flag now? At the moment, I think most of such images, rather than symbolizing the supremacy of the Ukrainian nation, aspire to express and preserve the Ukrainian identity and life itself in the face of genocide. Time will show whether such images will last after the war and what their ethos will be. And very short conclusion. The important thing is that the fact that in Ukraine, unlike in Russia, there exists space for experiment in the field of iconography and sacred art, which allows for a bridge between this world and that world in people's experience of faith during wartime. And another important thing is that there is a connection between the Ukrainian and contemporary ecumenical Orthodox social ethos, which can be observed in the aesthetic dimension in Ukraine now. Thank you.
I'm bringing some props here that I may or may not wave in the air. First, a disclaimer, I really am not an expert, neither in Ukraine or religion at all. Whatever I know about Ukraine, I learned from my students. I was blessed by a number of graduate students, Ukrainian. I hope one of them is on Zoom, Natalia Bezborodova, who is a real expert on religion in Ukraine. So whatever I know, I really learned from my students. One is working on Russian speakers, one is working on Russian propaganda. So what I can bring here in the hopes of just enlivening the discussion is, number one, I'm an anthropologist, so I'll try to bring some kind of anthropological perspective on this, and the other that I am from former Yugoslavia, from Belgrade, therefore from Serbia, another Orthodox community that celebrates according to the old Julian calendar. But I'm very glad that we had this introduction. I am a child of the New Year and Father Frost and the whole thing. That was the main thing for me. So what I'll try to do is just give some suggestions as to how to think about all this material. I can't really add anything. I don't have enough knowledge, but I would like to start from Oleg. Here is something from a longer paper where he says the traditional Julian calendar was perceived as one of the primary identifiers of Ukrainian church culture. Initially, it was a sign of resistance to Latinization, and after the Bolshevik Revolution, it was also a sign of resistance to the Soviet system. So I'm going to wave my first prop here, because technically, we in anthropology will call that diacritics, and that comes from Frederick Barth's Ethnic Groups and Boundaries. When I teach introductory anthropology, I give students only one page out of it. It's not very complicated. Basically, it says that we should think of group identities in terms of a very small number of elements that group will at different times in different contexts pick, select as a diacritic of their identity, also always in distinction to or in opposition to some other. So this is a very clear example, right? We pick the dates when we celebrate Christmas, partly to distinguish ourselves at different times from the West or Latinization, or from socialism, which of course is another way of modernizing enlightenment and so on. That is a pretty simple way of thinking that is obviously applicable to all kinds of things that are happening today. But what I want to do now is do a typical anthropological thing. And I like to say that anthropologists are really good at looking at large things through small things. That is our cachet. This is what we do. And by that, I'm thinking of something like the date of celebrating Christmas as what I would like to call the peg for memory, and peg for familiar memory. So I'm very grateful to our introduction because we got some of these pegs. My father reluctantly will tell you, me about the war, but instead of heroism, we get a little stories about food and rest and things like that, right? In our lives, celebrating Christmas or celebrating New Year would be the pegs of familial memory, intimate familiar memory. Now, the important thing is, as we all know, when regimes change, they really try to kind of push through their ideologies. And in fact, the most powerful way of pushing ideologies is not through written documents and propaganda, but precisely through, let's say, built environment. So this is why it was also mentioned yesterday, street names. I'm, walking through the street to my primary school, and the street may be named after some socialist hero. What do I care about socialist heroes? But this is the way in which the ideology becomes a part of my life. So this is just a kind of thinking about what these diacritics actually do at the level of kind of familial, intimate, everyday religiosity. I was very happy to hear that. The little flocks, the layperson. So this is what I keep thinking about when I think about, let's say, Christmas, right? So we get the larger picture, but then what is the intimate picture? What is celebrating Christmas? And I would think smells, food, and all kinds of things that are part of kind of our embodied existence. So this is why I would like to mention something that Oleg didn't, but that really caught my eye in his larger paper. And this is some comments that were following on what Archbishop of Kharkiv and Izium, Athanasi, wrote on a Facebook page. He was in the opposition to moving to 25. All right. So someone writes, January 7 is not a habit, just like walking with your feet is not a habit. This is somewhat natural and so on, right? But your imposition of secular December 25 only confirms its artificiality and its commercial component. Okay, my reaction to this is, it is a habit, right? Or habitus, to be technical now, which is term comes from Marcel Mauss and Pierre Bourdieu. It is like walking. So I recalled our dear friend and colleague Andrei Nakhachevsky, folklorist and dancer, who entertained us with this anecdote when he, as a young man, spent some serious time in Ukraine, was very proud of blending in. His Ukrainian was perfect and so on, until one day somebody calls across the street to him. I think it was in the 70s maybe. Oh, will you sell me your jeans? Now he was really disappointed because obviously he did not pass. There was something in his walking that showed him as a Westerner who may have like Levi's jeans to sell, right? And I remember Nakhachevsky's showing how the way you hold your feet in Ukrainian versus Russian dance is a diacritic of the difference between Russian and Ukrainian dances. So walking and body and habit do matter. That's the kind of intervention I wanted to make. And I was very pleased to hear references to that. What about 8,000 of these Ukrainian Orthodox Church? What about lay people? What about, their everyday life and their interaction with their priest in their village and so on? Now I want to pivot to Lidiya. The first thought was there was so much fascinating stuff in there. And I also teach anthropology of art, and I'm going to wave the second book here, and that is Art and Agency in Anthropological Theory by Alfred Gell. This was a book that made a big splash, and I always thought that it would be fascinating to actually analyze what is happening, for instance, in this case, through some of his conceptual apparatus that he came up with. The interesting thing about him is that he refuses to talk about art in terms of meaning, semiotics, or aesthetics. Instead, he's talking about what art does socially, what is the agency of objects. He also kind of provocatively said that what he's really interested in is art as psychological warfare. Now, we have seen some examples of that. By that he meant, that the prow of a canoe in Trobriand in Kula exchanges is carved with magic in order to bamboozle your trade partner into giving away gifts. Therefore, it is really psychological warfare. He's developed this whole matrix that makes it actually quite easy to compare all kinds of instances of art, such as icons and what they do. I was fascinated specifically by the issue of the material. And what is material doing? Obviously, the material that you take from the ammunition crates is doing something. Can we think more deeply about it? And that reminded me of something that has to do with orthodoxy. I was in England visiting a friend of mine who is Greek, a Jungian, but also was a part of that Essex church of Father Sophrony, who I actually met then. It was, I think, 86 when that happened. And he was telling me, look, we Greeks in London, we buy an Anglican church, convert it into Greek, and everything is fine. Nobody has any problem with that. But look at crazy Serbs. What do? I think it was in Birmingham. Not only do they make a replica, a copy of Studenica or something in Birmingham, but they also import the stone from Serbia. And, my anthropological mind says, oh, I have seen this somewhere, right? It is both the material coming from Serbia, that will be contiguity magic, and it also is a copy of a famous monastery. That comes from Fraser and so on. That's like metaphor, metonymy, et cetera, et cetera. It's a long. But this is just to say that there are very nifty tools for analyzing what is happening, what agency do crates from Kalashnikov ammunition have in this. And, and then if you have this kind of orientation, then you start thinking of what are these objects doing? Among other things, they're channeling money to hospitals, right? They are making all kinds of things in the causal milieu, as he would say. Another thing that I wanted to go into is icons as diacritics of identity. I did some work on that. This is another example. I'm just going to go through. Milic of Machva, the crazy painter, was a Serbian nationalist. Here are some of his weird images. He's kind of Salvador Dali sort of guy. You can see these are the elements of icons. And here is an icon floating in the air. He infamously also, these are the frescoes from a church in Belgrade, and that occasioned a lot of controversy because they're not canonical at all. But here you go. Okay, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any questions?
Hi, I'm Jacob Lassen. I had a question about this idea of optimization of celebrating Christmas, where that language comes from, and what does it actually mean to optimize your religious celebration?
This question is for Lidiya. I'm thinking about icons traditionally being catechetical tool when fused with liturgy, Germanos in the 8th century, and I'm wondering if we're witnessing to a shift. Knowing that icons are multifunctional, are we witnessing to a shift where icons are more public? Outside of the communion for which that they were painted. I would just ask you to reflect on the functionality, the purpose of iconography in the larger scheme.
I have a question to Oleg. I wonder what are relations within churches, within Greek Catholic Church and the OCU regarding relations between the leadership and communities that decided to stay with the old calendar. Are there any attempts to sanction them? Or they just decided to tolerate? Because I remember there was some sort of scandal within the OSCU about one of bishops who decided to do this. Whether their decision to stand with the old calendar, is it a sort of politicized by the leadership? That, you want to stay with the Russian calendar, you are not patriotic, and so on and so forth. And a comment to Lidiya, I can say nothing about icons and so on, but I just remember, and this is not related to your research, but as you show some examples from Russia as well, there was a good research about the icon that Kirill gifted to Zolotov. And this is, again, very specific icon, very unusual as I understand it. And then Slava Karpov did the research and explained that it was the icon that was gifted to General Brusilov during the First World War. And so, I mean, maybe it could be relevant to you as well.
It seems to me like a lot of what we're looking at with calendars and icons, these are markers of identities and groups and a change in the times. And I'm wondering specifically, Lidiya, if you can comment on to what extent the subject matter of these kinds of icons also then is sort of on another level used to distinguish from different groups. The Greek Catholics, you mentioned sort of Greek Catholics together with Orthodox, and even within the different jurisdictions of Orthodoxy. And given Nick's question about the sort of the public, it strikes me also the public display of icons. Do we see any kind of regional variation there? Does that also begin to be a statement of different regional cultures?
Calendar issue. It's been interesting, the concentration on Christmas and the adoption of the Western Christmas. But are we also seeing perhaps an amalgam going on? At the same time, over the past 10 to 15 years, we've seen the religious observance of Christmas return to areas of Ukraine where it hadn't earlier. I wonder, I mean, you've given the legal parts about it, but are people discussing that what we will wind up with is some combination of what is now a secularized, general European Christmas, plus this newly religious Christmas, which to many Ukrainians in the south and east, and not only has only really come over to the television in the past 15 or 20 years.
I have a comment to the question to Oleg. Thank you so much for looking into the calendar situation. There was something remarkable happening in the context of the events Oleg explicated to us. On TV, there was actually a massive information campaign saying things like, for the first time, all together, all Ukrainians united, we celebrate Christmas on December 25th. And then the Moscow Church will celebrate on January 7th. And to make the things even more complicated, it was said very intensively on TV that on January 6th, there will be what we call Водохреща, the feast of the baptisms of the Lord. And on Водохреща, there is this ritual of getting sacred water from priests. Imagine January 6th. The UFC is celebrating Christmas Eve, and masses of people come to the UFC and ask for the sacred water. The UFC priests developed quite a few survival strategies on the day, because of course saying we don't do Водохреща today was very dangerous, because then you might face, so you're the Russian church, and here we go. So I was wondering, Oleg, whether you had time and desire to look at the diversity of those survival strategies, whether you could tell us the different techniques the priests used, because I know of some, but maybe you do it like on more large-scale basis. Thank you.
Do icons become more public? My research is happening, taking into consideration this flow and social concept ethos. And I would say that one of the main ideas of flow is the dialogue between church and society. The idea that the church is not ontologically different from society, but a part of society. So there is not such a strict barrier between the church and society. And in this sense, if we already or are to experience the shift towards the flow ethos on a wider scale, then probably will be also a shift of icons becoming more public. For the time being, well, of course, I showed a selection of certain icons, and they're mostly icons for exhibition. Only icons on ammo boxes project I saw in churches in Ukraine. Others, they are used privately, I guess, for private prayer, or some of them are not icons, probably just for meditation. But because the flow ethos goes kind of, let's say, away from Byzantium, more into apostolic church, and more into this, like away from the church-concentrated religiosity into the open, inclusive, so forth, experience of faith, yes, I would say that if Ukraine accepts the flow ethos more, we will have more of that and more place for creativity and experiment. If not, we will see. Now it's just, it's happening. And at the moment, unfortunately, UOC, OCU, even Greek Catholic Church, they're pretty conservative. So I'm showing you the icons that would not be so frequent in the churches. As for regional particularities, I would say that this icons in national colors are more characteristic for Western regions. And some people will tell me, okay, these are Greek Catholic icons because they're traditionally more nationalistic and so on. However, the OCU now is pretty patriotic, let's say. It's just the issue is that the Greek Catholic Church is more open to experiment, and in the visual field there is just more happening. In OCU there is less happening, therefore less artists, and in the UOC almost nothing. So we'll see. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your feedbacks and your questions. First of all, from anthropological perspective, I agree with you totally that from anthropological view, we can talk about Christmas as habit, right? This citation was like an illustration that there are different kinds of arguments, right? People use different kinds of arguments. One of the arguments was also an anecdote, right? It was on the website of Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The question, when should we celebrate Christmas? The answer, start Christmas feast and count 40 days. This is also a very religious answer and argument to the question. And this is an argument that people who discuss switching, probably they are not very religious, right? Because they never talk about that in public space. About optimization, this is like ordinary bureaucratic language that all bureaucrats, I thought probably all over the world use, but it is probably specific post-Soviet thing, right? That you should, in explanatory note, probably have some arguments why you're doing that. And this is one of the, optimization is one of the keywords that they can use to explain something. How many communities? Last year I found that less than 2% of communities of Orthodox Church of Ukraine still on the old Julian calendar. One of the reasons why, because the council make a decision that they allow them to celebrate whenever they want. One of the reasons, one of the explanations that they study international experience. They saw that there was a lot of splits inside different Orthodox churches when they changed the calendar. So they didn't want to have a schism in the church. That is why they allowed to do that.
Thank you very much. Congratulate to our presenters, our commentator. Thank you very much for asking so many questions that you have a chance to discuss them after break. Thank you very much.